can catch it up. Right. So we're recording now. Thanks for letting me know. Yeah, as I was saying, most of you are involved in health and safety already, or in some aspect of it. So this module should, in theory, be relatively straightforward. You should be teaching me actually in this. You should be giving me your, and that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see your contributions, your points, your experiences as we go through the process. Tonight we're just going to make a simple start, very straightforward start looking at risk assessment itself, risk management as an aspect of hazard analysis. But I was actually watching a documentary on Saturday morning. I was lecturing Saturday, so I was just before I went into the lecture, I was watching had on the TV, and there was a documentary on, and it was about the Hurley Free Enterprise ferry disaster back in '87, I think it was. The one that capsized, leaving Zeebrugge, and it actually got me thinking. In light of what we're going to be covered on this module, this was a ship that left port. First, it was calling to a port in Zeebrugge that wasn't the usual ship. When they had a big crowd, when the ship was very heavily booked, they switched the boat. And the boats that would normally be used, the smaller vessels that would normally be used on the Zeebrugge run, were also out for refit. So they sent in one of the bigger cross-channel ferries. And that was one of the first problems that they had, in that the ferry had, the Hurley Free Enterprise had vehicles on deck and had vehicles in the garage. Arriving in Zeebrugge, the bridge would reach, that the ramp would reach from the quayside. The ramp coming out would reach the lower deck, the garage, but it wouldn't reach the open deck. It wouldn't stretch. It was too short. So they had to flood 2 compartments on the vessel to lower it by, hi Richard, they had to flood 2 compartments to lower it by about a meter to allow the bridge to reach, so they could offload the top deck. Thing was, they never pumped that water out. Hazard number 1. The ship was running late, and no problem, Louise, you're in the right place now. It was grand. The ship was running late, and when it was leaving, the guy who was responsible, the bosun who was supposed to be responsible for closing the doors, the bow doors, yeah, I can, yeah, no problem. Can hold around, yeah. Don't know there are many more to come in. There's 32 people here now. Richard is coming in.
There was about a dozen people in another link, Dennis.
Okay.
There was about 10 or 12 in another link. There seems to be 2 links. Some people went into the other one. So I'd say
I'll have to check where the second link is, because there shouldn't be a second link. I only set up 1 link.
No matter.
I see where the second link is. No, I don't. That's the right one. Today's the 16th. Okay. No problem, Judson. We're hanging on for people. Yeah, just take a look again. I don't see a second link. I don't know where the link was used.
Dennis, it's yours.
Yeah.
You do it slightly different than other people, and you click on one, opens up two, and sometimes people click on the first one instead of the second one down, even though it's one is like a recurrent one and the other is the present one. I'd say that's what it is because I've done that.
Okay, yeah, one is the umbrella for
Yeah.
everything else.
Yeah, I don't know, but I'm guessing that's what it is because I did that a couple of times in the past and I learned the hard way. So I'd say that's probably what's going on.
Possible, but that shouldn't let you into another class.
No, it
because
shouldn't. No, it shouldn't.
Let's just see. I'm just looking at the controls here while I wait for people to come in. I actually don't see a way of blocking that first link because I think if I block that link, it blocks everything. Okay, I'll take a look at it and see what I can do, or I'll talk to the college and see if anything can be done. Thanks for letting me know. I won't be talking about the assignment for. I won't be talking about the assignment, Paul, for a couple of weeks until we get into it. We're all here now. Anybody not here, please raise your hand. Okay. Thanks, Mike. Okay, everybody's okay. We're good to go. Right. Okay. As I was just saying, it was just because I was thinking about the start of this module. I think to help, Mike. I think to help. I know how you feel. Don't worry. It's a kind of a thing I say in most classes anyway. At some point, just to see if people are listening. But I was listening to this, watching this documentary, and I think I've seen it before, but I never paid much attention. But in light of what we're doing tonight, or this module, I paid more attention. And basically, the ship was pulling out, was running late. It was the bow doors were open. The bosun who's supposed to be responsible for closing the bow doors was on a 24-hour shift, so he was catching a few hours sleep and basically slept it out, and nobody missed him. There was nobody looking after closing the doors. There was no warnings to the crew until it was too late, and nearly 200 people lost their lives. The thing that got me thinking was, for years before the Hurler Free Enterprise capsized, a reporter had done some analysis and had raised issues. There was no There was no way for the bridge to know that the doors were open, because the bow doors at the time opened sideways. They didn't, like current boats or more modern boats, the bow opens up and over the front of the boat. So standing in the bridge, you can see that the bow door is up there. It's pointing to the sky instead of straight in front. But in the Hurler Free Enterprise, they opened sideways. Both sides, they split down the middle. And this reporter had seen that and flagged it. And there had been a couple of incidents where ships had, one of them apparently was a ship leaving port, a sister ship of the Free Enterprise had been leaving a port, and it was another ship coming in, a completely different ship coming into port, and they started seeing lights from an unusual part of the ship, which turns out that the bow doors were open and they could see lights inside the ship. And only for the fact that they radioed the boat and said, your front doors are open, the ship could have been in worse condition. You're right, Mike. The union raised issues, reporters raised issues. But so the hazard was clearly identified, and management refused to accept it and refused to do anything about it. At the end of the day, they went and put these lights in. It was cost, yeah, and this is the killing bit. Now 200 people lost their lives. After the incident, they went and retrofitted lights in the bridge of all the vessels to connect them to the doors to let them see that the doors are open or closed. Cost per vessel to put this light system in was £500. I suppose what got me thinking was, and something we have to keep thinking about as we're looking at as we go through this process. Hazard analysis, risk management, the type of stuff that you guys do in your day-to-day work, the type of stuff that this module is going to look at. We really, there's a major issue in the middle of all of that. We can identify all the hazards we want, but it's going to come down to cost. And it's going to come down to management. Somebody saying we can't allow that to happen and put processes in place to rectify it. The hard fact of, for example, air incidents, if a plane crashes, there's an investigation. If it is conclusively proven that the incident occurred because of a severe mechanical situation, well, then it might get resolved. If it is, thanks, Mike, if it isn't because of, if they can't prove it conclusively, well, nothing happens. And we saw it a couple of years ago with the Boeing 737 MAX 8s. We had the plane, new plane, take off in, I think it was Indonesia, lose control, crash, everyone killed. Nothing was, well, there was an investigation being done, but no aircraft was grounded, no adjustments, no nothing done to fix anything, because immediately Boeing blamed the pilots. The pilots didn't understand the flight, how to fly the plane. They didn't know, they didn't learn right. Somebody else's fault. The second aircraft crashed in Africa, Ethiopia, I think, or it's Ethiopian Air, crashed. The one which had the Irish aid worker on it. And still, Boeing blamed pilots, blamed anything and everything but the plane. Despite the fact that there's a documentary about that, and there was a lot of people within Boeing, engineers, raising red flags all over the place about the potential hazards. And it was ignored by management. 339 people lost their lives. The only thing that grounded the MAX 8 was the aviation authorities around Europe to begin with, like the British Aviation Authority, the Irish Aviation Authority, French, German, basically said MAX 8s cannot fly in our airspace. They're risky. We're not letting them fly. They essentially banned the Boeing 737 MAX 8 from airspace. That puts pressure back on the airlines, which puts pressure back on Boeing. But those planes in America had a couple of near misses, no crashes, but some serious near misses over an engineering situation or a piece of equipment that wasn't actually, that should have been in the aircraft, but was listed as an optional extra. It seems crazy, but at the end of the day, yeah, that is, I saw that in the documentary, that they've been taken over and that the whole culture within the business changed, and it was all money, and we don't want to know if there's a problem. It's money driven, and that, I suppose, is the point I'm bringing up here. There's a lot of evidence across all industry sectors that hazard analysis or risk management gets attention only if it's going to be proven that there's a cost in it. Mike. Mike,
Can you hear me, Dennis?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Oh, that's better. Funny enough, the Ethiopian Lion Airlines one, the final report was only released on the 6th of this month. So it's taken the best part of 2.5 years to actually come out as a final report.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's more than likely.
And that is also a problem because of, but it's also a problem because of the time it takes for the findings to become, if you like, out in the open. They're all hid behind court cases and challenges and everything else, so nobody can physically act on them until they're out in the public domain.
Yeah, that is a huge issue, and it's not just in the airline industry; it's across everything. Which does cause a problem. Sorry, Alan. Yes, I'm recording as we speak. It's recording right now, so recordings will be available within whatever, probably sometime late tomorrow or Wednesday. No problem. So yeah, I mean, that is something I suppose we have to bear in mind. We can have all the theories and all the processes and practices about risk assessments, and I would imagine those of you who actually do these things for a living, who conduct risk assessments, risk analysis, who conduct or hazard analysis, risk assessments, whatever you call it, I'm going to guess that it can get very frustrating because there's a fear. There's a fear of litigation. There's a fear of publicity. There's a fear of just what it's all involved, what it involves. Then when something does go wrong, as Mike was pointing out, it's tied up in more legal cases, more claims, more buts. That's not correct. That's not all the facts. That's not considering this. And one of the arguments they had on I believe on the 737 MAX 8 was the pilots didn't know how to fly. They weren't trained. These are commercial airline pilots. And basically, there was a sense, at least this is the sense I got from watching the documentaries and listening to the reports, was that the attitude was they're foreign pilots. They wouldn't understand how to fly these American planes. They wouldn't understand. They can't. They're foreign pilots. They can't read the controls, which I thought was quite an insulting comment to make to a group of professionals who are trained. Yeah, cost, cut things back, cut things from, and Airbus does the same. It's not just Boeing. Airbus streamlines some of the stuff to try and reduce the amount of crossover time for type rating, which to an extent bypasses some of the potential hazards, or opens it up to more hazards. The point I suppose I'm making is that it was meant to be robust, and that's the actual statement, Gary. It was meant to be robust. It was meant to work. It was meant to do this, that, and the other thing. And that's all very well, except when the computers don't do what they're supposed to do, and the guys who are flying the plane don't know what to do to resolve it. There was one actually I saw going back several months now of a fairly new plane. Yeah. That's not the first time that happened. There was one off the coast of America, the west coast of America a number of years ago. Basically, the pilot fought the plane the whole way to the sea. And it turns out that software had been changed in the aircraft and nobody told the pilots. So the pilot was doing what they were trained to do when something happens in the cockpit. All they actually had to do was take their hands off the controls. The plane was fighting to do what the pilot was fighting to do, and between the two of them, the plane crashed. And it was because someone changed the software, and nobody told anybody. It was just an check a box update upgrade. And that's a good point, Mark. People, self-regulation, there's kind of there are, but I thought the FAA would have been there to oversee things. But there's so much protection and data protection and stuff like that. There's no information shared. I think you're right, Mike. So we have plenty of evidence of this. No problem, Garden. Sorry. Apologies. Forgot that some people might be traveling either now or shortly. No, they don't regulate Boeing. That's correct. They don't regulate the manufacturers, but I would, that they're the closest thing to inspectorate in aviation. But unfortunately, they only step in when things go wrong after the horse is bolted, so to speak. Again, James, that's highlighting the point that I'm kind of in a very roundabout way of making. It's all very well to have all the concepts and the regulations and bits and pieces, but there's other drivers in business that very often chuck all this analytical work out the window. Sure, why not live dangerously, Mike? Across the Bermuda Triangle, it's grand. Do it during the day and you'll be all right. Do it at night, you might be a problem. I mean, I've worked in the food industry and in the FMCG sector, and some of the stuff is scary at times. Now, it did improve, but there's always the case of what happens when this material urgently needed and the truck is about to go and has to go in order to make a ferry or to make a delivery. It has to get out to get to a location. And checks have to be done. Are the checks done? Do we follow the procedures as rigorously as we should? Or does somebody in management step in and say, just let it go this time? Let it go. Even though there might be hazards, even though there might be unsafe practices, even though something is not right, it is not the procedure, it's not the signed SOP, standard operating procedure. I signed nothing, Louise. Last time I signed something, it cost me a couple $100,000 on a house. Now my wife is working at the moment to make me sign another one, so I ain't signing that for the moment. And that's what I find is kind of a little bit interesting. There's a bit of a caveat, I suppose, in anything to do with health and safety. Any aspect of health and safety, whether it is hazard analysis or whether it is risk management, it doesn't matter. There is a commercial caveat. Mike?
The thing is, Dennis, it's never a problem until there is a problem. All of these things go on day in, day out. The Herald of Free Enterprise was non-stop. She'd been doing that because it was quicker in and out of port, and it went on and on and on and on and on that way. You've only got to look at the people that go up and down ladders that are unsafe, use scaffoldings that are unsafe. That's just the very. Hang on, I'm trying to turn my phone off. That's just the start of it, and it goes on and on and on. And until something crashes or someone falls off or somebody dies, it goes on day in, day out, and it's done. And it's all to do with cost. It's all to do with profit margins. It's all to do with wringing the last amount of money out of bottom line.
Yep, exactly.
Rant over.
No argument here. It's exactly the point I'm making. It's exactly what happens, and what happens when something does go wrong, and it's the person who's encountered the error, the person who's fallen or has broken a leg or an arm or their neck or something. They're blamed for not following procedure. The procedure's there. You should have followed it. Why didn't you follow the procedure? So it's almost like one of these things that management can hide behind when they want to. So what it kind of makes this module a little bit different insofar as we're going to be looking at various situations and looking at various concepts, but we have to take them with this, I suppose, a grain of salt. And I don't want to be negative about it, but we do have to take them with a grain of salt because there's a real world out there where things get done differently. And even going through the proposals that you submitted over for your dissertations, and there's a lot of them looking at that sort of process, this sort of situation, this very situation of things that are not being followed, and how do you get compliance, Mike? Was that a twitch at the wrist to put up the hand again, or is the microphone turned off? No, mic's on. Okay, so it's going to be an interesting little journey. The module itself is going to look at a number of different things, and basically just to get you to start at exactly what you're doing right now, being able to look at a review an organization's hazard analysis. Someone's playing with my computer screen. Conducting analysis, hazard analysis, risk assessments across organizations. Critically think independently, identifying hazards and risks in the workplace, and demonstrating the understanding of the implementation of actions to manage them. Identifying and applying health and safety regulations, stuff you're doing on day in day out for the majority of you. So this module, as I said, should not be a difficult situation. Developing communications, so writing a report about it, not taking 2.5 years like the MAX 8 aircraft, being able to do it we'll be doing it in a few weeks. Looking at human factors, and basically when things go wrong, it's going to be the human factors, because the procedures are implemented by humans, and when things go wrong, the knock-on effect can be huge. Just looking at problem solving, investigating accidents, preparing reports, you'll be doing that. Or preparing a report is the second assignment. Looking at how hazard analysis and control is cost effective. Is it cost effective? Can it be made cost effective? We just talked about things happening and things going, it all comes down to cost. And until something goes wrong, it's pretty much ignored. We'll cut the corner because it's grand. We've always done it this way. And being able to maintain records and can just understand that element of it. For the records, there are 2 assessments in this, no exams. There'll be a kind of a project and a practical. One is more theoretical and one is more practical. The theoretical one is just kind of assessing the theories around hazard analysis, risk management, that sort of stuff. And the practical is actually go and conduct a hazard analysis either in your work or club or somewhere that you can conduct one and then write it up based on what you find. We'll talk more about those in due course, not tonight, in a couple of weeks' time. There's some books there. I'm not telling you go out and buy books, but if you're interested in the field, if you haven't got them already, some of you may already have them, because I know you're IOSH certified or members or whatever, so you may have access to these things already. But there are some things out there that if you're interested, you can go after. If you're looking to make it as kind of a consultancy-based job, a role that you're maybe moving into at some point, then it might be no harm to have some of these on hand. that you have reference documents that you can go back to. Right, we're going to start tonight with risk management as a concept itself. Now, as I said, for most of you, what we're doing in this module is your bread and butter. So it shouldn't actually be that difficult a module for you to do, which is fine. It's always nice to have one that's reasonably straightforward to do. And I welcome any inputs that you want to throw my way. If you've come across articles or documents you want to share, you can email them to me and I'll post them up on Blackboard, or come to these sessions, and I have no problem with you throwing up your ideas, your comments, your examples, like you've been doing for this evening so far, which is quite interesting. Thanks for those. So keep that going, just so that we can, all learn from what's going on around us and just see how wide an issue things are. Or how successful things can be, or how well things can work, or how well they don't work. I generally start something on risk management with with an image like this. To begin with, here in Ireland, we have absolutely no concept of size when it comes to these container ships. The boats we get here in Ireland were considered large back in the 70s and 80s. They're dwarfed by the ones that are on the oceans nowadays. The biggest ones that are out there at the moment carry, I think it's almost 25,000 containers. There's a fleet of them being developed for that. I think the Hong Kong was one of the biggest ones, and that was about 22. And I think there are actually plans to produce 25,000 capacity vessels. The ones we get here in Ireland are less than 10. And our ports, even the new Deepwater berth in Ringaskiddy, can't handle the biggest ships. They haven't got the cranes to actually offload them. So we have the second biggest natural port in the world after Sydney, and we can't take the bigger boats. We have the Deepwater berth, but we don't have the physical capacity to offload them. The thing is that you put a container on one of these massive ships and you think it's going to be safe. There's no problem. That's it. Once this big steel box on a boat, it's going to be fine. We're out in the middle of the big Atlantic or the big Pacific or the big any ocean, coming around the Horn of Africa, one of the roughest seagoing places in the world. And these big, massive ships are little more than a cork on the water, and they'll get thrown around in the waves. So if you don't get squeamish, take a look at the videos on YouTube taken from the bridge of some of these ships in a storm, with the bow disappearing into the water and the containers getting a nice big wash. Every year, about 10,000 containers fall off ships. Even though they're essentially tied on, they're locked into each other. About 10,000 fall off ships every year. And that in itself creates a hazard. Because a container, when it comes off a ship, doesn't sink. Or at least depending on what's in it. In general, they don't sink. But equally, they don't float on top of the water. In most cases, they will sink till the top of the container is at the surface of the water. And that's where the trapped air gathers and holds it buoyant. And the hazard is then that one of those containers made of steel can actually puncture the side of a passing vessel. if the boat hits it at the wrong angle. Even a big ship like this, because of costs, again, the construction of these ships, most of them are not double walled or double skinned. So they're not impervious to hitting something. Or when they hit something, they're not that protected. So you have this a double whammy. You have the risk of your product never arriving. In that ship in the image, you have a number of containers on the right-hand side which are going to arrive, but they're crushed. So they're of no use. And you can say, yeah, there's insurance. Yeah, fine, there is. There's insurance, there's shipping conventions where there's various claims can be made against in the Hague, Visby, and all these other rules that apply to ocean transport or air transport or rail transport or road transport, depending on which convention we're applying. The fact is, these risks happen. These things happen. We can analyze it to hell, but still things can go wrong. And the knock-on effect can be another issue. Mike. Like your microphone is off, or you've got to twitch over that raise hand button. What happens with the ones that fall in the water is that they can't be tagged. As in, a ship, if they know it's gone off, it's no problem. Like, it's okay. If a container falls off a ship and the captain sees it's going over, they can't lift it back up because these boats don't have cranes, so they can't necessarily yank it back out of the water. But they equally can't mark where it is. They can say where it fell off, but they can't say where it is now or in an hour's time because the container's floating. So it's going to go with the tide. It's going to go with the current, which makes it difficult for shipping. And there was a period of time where navies of the world, if they were told there was a container somewhere floating around, has been spotted, which is hard to spot, they would try and find it, and if they found it, they would shoot it. They would shoot it full of holes. And the idea being fill it with water and sink it. But you got to find it first. In a moving sea, top of a container floating on the surface, with just the top of it at the surface, it's going to be very hard to say what's a wave, what's the color of water, dark. I mean, all those containers are dark colors. So what's that color in the water and what's actual ocean until you hit it. Of course, there's also the situation where the odd one comes ashore. There was a situation a number of years ago on the south coast of England where a container or a couple of containers came ashore on the English from the Channel, and it turns out that they had brand new Kawasaki motorbikes on board. And there were a lot of people came down with their pickup trucks and their trailers and got themselves a free Kawasaki motorbike. Even though they put security to try and stop them, they couldn't. It was salvage. Ireland, when that happened in Cork, in Fountainstown, just outside, just at the mouth of Cork Harbour, it was pink detergent bottles that they got. The English south coast of England got wood or got motorbikes, and we got detergent bottles, empty detergent bottles. Not quite the same. The thing is, there's a risk. There's a risk when we look to source materials that it may not arrive. There's the risk that can happen in transit. Look at the Ever Given 2 years ago nearly. 2 years ago in March. the MV Ever Given, one of the biggest container ships in the world, coming through the Suez Canal. Same as hundreds of boats do every day of the week, every day of the year. And because the Suez Canal is a contraflow, a one-way system, it was coming through. Wind caught it. The depth of water under the ship was not enough to give her traction for the propellers to pull her out and keep her moving. She blew sideways and into a sandbank, into the side of the canal. And it was a week before they got the ship unstuck. Did anybody see that a boat like that could have that sort of a problem? And if it did go into the sandbank, then it would take a week to get it back out. That it wouldn't be in deep enough water, that the draft underneath the ship wouldn't be sufficient to allow the propellers on this massive ship to have traction to pull it back out. So they had to dig it out. Exactly, Mike. Exactly. And a lot of other stuff took a long time as well. And the crazy thing about it is when they did get that ship freed up, it had to be taken to a port in Egypt for assessment. And then there was a whole debate about who was going to cover the cost of digging it out, the rescue, which means that all the containers on that ship were left sitting there. That happened in March, first week of April, it was released. It was August, I think, before the ship actually got back away. And in the meantime, its sister ship had a similar situation in England. Or sorry, not England, in America. They were coming out of a port with a pilot on board, out of some port in America, and where they should have gone straight, they turned left or they turned right. They went somewhere they shouldn't have gone and ran it onto a mount bank. And it was there for 4 weeks. They actually had to dredge it out and take 5,000 containers off it to lighten it enough to get it moving again. I think, Damien, a couple of kids with buckets and spade from the beach would have lifted it out faster. But look, the thing is, there are hazards. There are things that happen that if you ask somebody about it, they wouldn't have seen it. They'd have said, no, that can't happen. If you told people 3 years ago that, or 4 years, 3.5 years ago, that a microorganism which was discovered in a place nobody ever heard of called Wuhan in China, if somebody had said that that microorganism would ultimately grind the entire world to a halt, they'd have laughed at him. You're being dramatic. If you saw it in a movie, you'd say it's fictitious. It's so fairy tale stuff. But guess what? Japan or China only opened their borders over Christmas. That's true, Mike. I have a friend who's a health and safety manager. He's a health and safety consultant, and he says there's no such thing as an accident. He's always said there's no such thing as an accident. I've actually seen him get into hot water at meetings when he stood up and said that. Because the implication was an accident was something that we couldn't have known about. But it's the unforeseen circumstances that combined lead to the issue. And that's what hazard analysis is. And I know people involved in health and safety, and I know people involved in these conducting these hazard analysis, risk assessments in their organizations, and they're seen as the Grim Reaper. One person I know worked in a hospital. I presume she's still there. I haven't seen her in a while. And when she walks into a ward to conduct an assessment, she is basically told When she walks in, she told me she walked into the ward at one stage, and there's a consultant with some of his or her interns. And they were kind of sitting around talking. He was sitting on one of these pedal bins, on the lid of one of these pedal bins, and they were joking and messing around and having just a chat, or as my daughter would say, having the chats. And in comes this person to do her hazard and assessment or risk assessment of the room to make sure everything was going okay. As she walked in the door, he said, "Oh, here comes the Grim Reaper. We're okay today. You don't need to find any faults here. There's no faults here today." Well, she walked up to him. She said, "Okay, that's fine. It's great to know. It makes my job easier. By the way, will you be seeing patients later on?" He said, "Of course I will." "Okay, and I presume before you go see the patients, you will go change out of your coat and scrubs." "And why would I do that?" "Well, you're probably going to be sitting on their bed to talk to them. It's a children's hospital, so you'll sit on the bed to comfort them and, be friendly and chatty with them. And you're sitting on a bin at the moment." Risk assessment done. Unfortunately, that's what we're up against. Risk assessment, hazard analysis, whatever you want to call it, whatever phrase you want to put on it. It's the doom and gloom. It's the what might happen, but hasn't happened, and might never happen. Unfortunately, for a lot, it's seen as the fear factor, rather than it's a safety enhancement. It's identifying the best way to do something, which has been tried and tested. It's the procedures to avoid things happen, to recognize that things can still happen. Because even when you have all the belt and braces on it, all those containers are tied down, they're locked into each other. That doesn't stop Mother Nature taking them apart when she wants to. Because at the end of the day, it's a man-made structure. And if the one thing is proven, man-made structures haven't a hope of standing up against a determined Mother Nature. And most of it is down to, there's a human error in there somewhere. So risk management as a definition then, and again, I'm speaking to the preaching to the choir here. A risk management is a process of measuring or assessing risk and developing the strategies to manage them. And you can replace hazard into that statement. Any hazards, identify hazards, potential hazards, put strategies in place to address them, develop work practices, apply regulations that require them, health and safety regulations that require companies and people to follow, organize training for people and get them to sign off that they're trained. That still doesn't mean that anyone's going to follow them. It just means that you're covering yourself by saying, well, I'm putting people through the training and getting them to sign off on it. We have a couple of things we can do with them. We can transfer risk, so we can pass it on to somebody else. Let the contractor take full responsibility. Outsource the problem, outsource the risk, outsource the hazard. So there is somebody else is responsible for ensuring that it actually all works and fits. That can work. We can avoid it or mitigate it. Put steps in place to make sure it doesn't happen. Belt and braces stuff. Not allowed into the department or into the area without the suitable personal protective equipment. And if you're not wearing it or seeing with it, you are told get out. It doesn't matter who you are. You're told to get out. If you don't follow the procedures, somebody's going to pull you up on it. Anybody can pull you up on it. Doesn't have to be a health and safety person. It doesn't have to be a manager or a supervisor. It can be an operator. If you're in breach of regulations, everybody has the authority to say, sorry, you're not complying with the stuff here. You need to do what you're told. Go in now and follow the rules. Once that mentality is there, there's a little bit more compliance, because management who can be, and I'm not saying they all are, management who can be one of the worst to adhere to some of the rules and regulations, or can be the least compliant because they're management, don't like to be told what to do by a lesser mere mortal. Yeah, you still have to make sure that they meet the requirements. You're dead right, Damien. Even if you've outsourced it, you are still responsible for it. Once they're on your property, once they're in your operation, even though you've outsourced it, you still have to ensure, you still have to manage it. Because at the end of the day, if they're not compliant, your neck is on the block. From their perspective, their management perspective, it can mean that they're not going to get future contracts. But as it stands on that spot, it's your responsibility, and that's one of the things I think somebody here is doing in their dissertation, or look through the dissertation, is looking at the whole thing about what happens when people are coming from different jurisdictions, where there's different compliance regulations. They have a different set of rules. How do you work that one? It's the domestic, it's where you're working is the rules that need to apply. But if someone has been brought up or trained and uses a different set of rules, it can be hard to reprogram. In the urgency of getting something done, we can revert to our natural style, which is the stuff we'd have done every other day. It's still applying their rules, still applying being compliant, but it's being compliant with the wrong jurisdiction, which makes it more difficult. In a commercial sense, and taking the example of a supply chain, we add the balance of trying to the probability of demand and the likelihood of supply. In the current situation, across all industries, we could still argue this point. There's a shortage of people. Sometimes a shortage of suitably qualified people. There's an urgency to get people on board so that companies can deliver contracts, deliver projects. And especially if there's penalty clauses in the contracts for delayed completion. Then we have a situation where we have issues with supply and demand. Increasing costs, reducing people. And since COVID, that has been a kind of a cross-industry situation across all industries, where companies are complaining that they just can't get the resources, they can't get the people to do the jobs, which puts pressure on the people who are left to do the jobs, and therefore I'm not saying it does all the time, but can, try to be very politically careful here, or legally careful, can result in corners being cut in terms of hazard analysis, risk management, control, quality control. which is a scary situation. It's a scary situation to have to think about. But as was pointed out at the start this evening, it's what's happening. The rules are there, but the rules will be, to an extent, ignored or tweaked or manipulated until something goes wrong. Then the rule book comes out for a while and everybody follows the rules, and that slows everything down. Or the rules, there's an agreement to change the rules. Exactly, Mike, thank you. They're interpreted. And it's amazing how many interpretations you can get. And some of the regulations are artfully vague anyway. They're left to interpretation. And it's how they're interpreted. Bear in mind, it's people interpreting them. So we're trying to move things within our businesses across everything. Supply chain affects everybody in our organizations. It affects everything from the supply of materials, the supply of people, the supply of equipment, the right equipment in the right place at the right time in the right quantity. The late show approach, one for everybody in the audience. Managing the process to ensure that there's business continuity. At the end of the day, business continuity is what's going to win out. Companies will do whatever they need to do to ensure the business continues. And that, to me, is the biggest threat to hazard analysis or risk management. Business continuity will always, in my view, come first. Whether that's building a housing estate or a tower block or a factory or producing products. Continuity will always win out. Add in situations like holiday periods, Christmas, Easter, Patrick's Day, summer. Add in the shortages that are there of staff at the moment, the uncertainty in demand because of the fact that this year is different to last year. As this time last year we were still under COVID. This year we're not, so there's uncertainty in demands. There are shortages in supply globally because of weather, because of war, because of COVID, because of a load of different reasons. All of which affects potential continuity, which will impact attitudes towards hazard analysis. Containers, exactly. Containers still in the wrong place. Good point, Mark. I was talking to somebody earlier back in September-ish, and they were telling me that they had container ships. They were, I think they were Hapag-Lloyd, the company he worked for, the container company, and it was taking 8.5 days to get a ship offloaded in Long Island in California. It was an 8.5 day queue to get in. So they were sending their boats down the coast to another port. The problem is the other port could offload the containers. But the return containers were also sitting up in Long Island. So the ship wasn't doing the pickup to continue. That's because they're not being picked up to come back, because the ships are being diverted to drop somewhere else. Shanghai is only after opening its port in the last couple of weeks. They had another massive delay in ships. Containers and ships are being misplaced, as in they're being dropped in one place, but the pickup isn't being organized because they can't get to it. They can't get up to pick them up. I mean, they weren't going to go back and sit for 8.5 days and wait to pick up the empties, which means the containers are out of place. They're in the wrong part of the world. And now they essentially need a number of ships to go in and take just empty containers. And that doesn't pay. Replace or repositioning doesn't work. Yeah, which doesn't work, which basically doesn't work on the Make America Great bit again, because they're importing more than they export. But see, an empty container isn't paying for anything. It's not paying any money. It's just moving a box. But ships want boxes, those boxes with stuff in them, which they're being paid to move. No one's paying to move the empty containers. Even liners, cruise liners, will have their cruise ship around the Mediterranean, and they want to reposition it to the Caribbean. So they'll do some mini cruises out of the Caribbean, out of the Mediterranean to Portugal, maybe. Or there's been a few of them come into Cove. They go from Southampton to Cove. Just a couple of days. They get some money, and then they go off and do the cross Atlantic sailing to reposition it with no passengers, because it's a one-way trip, and it's for repositioning. Once COVID finished, or was started to come out, all the aircraft were in the wrong place. Moving an empty vessel, moving, is known as a ghost. An empty train is a ghost train. It doesn't exist. It's not a formal transport. It's taking up time and diesel or fuel or electricity or whatever, and it's taking up crew time and all that stuff. It's costing money to move it, but it's not earning any money. We get one here in Carlow every morning. It's 6:30. Comes down here about 6 o'clock. I used to get it to Dublin. I call it the zombie train, because everybody who gets onto it was like a zombie. But it came down as a ghost train. It would come down empty to Carlow from Inchicore or Houston. Turn around, and at 6:30 it will start its journey all the way back to Dublin, and then it's up and running for the day. Same with aircraft. Sending an empty aircraft somewhere is a ghost aircraft, and that, while that's not a risk or a hazard, it's a cost. You're paying a crew, you're paying air miles on the wear and tear of the aircraft, you're paying fuel, you're paying airport charges, parking charges, all that sort of stuff, ground charges, just to position it, just to move it from A to B. And then if something happens with that aircraft, if it gets a puncture, if there's a mechanical fault, if anything goes wrong with it, then you have another delay. You have more money being taken. You have to go and charter an aircraft, which costs even more money. You may have to get a different aircraft, as in a different type of aircraft. And that means I've got to get a completely different crew, because a pilot's only licensed to fly one type of aircraft. All of these headaches are the things that affect the biggest issue that impacts our hazard analysis, our risk assessments, and that's business continuity. That's the biggest scare factor for any manager. Will it impact the business and the ability to continue the business, to continue operating, to complete a contract, to complete the order, to complete the requirements. The next step in the process is compliance with the regulations and with the rules and with the acts and all the other bits and pieces, the SOPs and all the other bits and pieces. But the first one is, what do we need to do to get this over the line? We'll worry about everything else after that. And unfortunately, that's a scary truth. We take a look at just general business risks, not construction, just general business risks, supply risks, supplier failure. I've worked in supply chain. It's my background. So how many times we've opened the back of a truck? You open it very carefully because you're terrified that a pallet has moved. Pallet has moved. I've more than once opened the back of a truck, just about got it closed again before a pallet fell out on top of me. Because in transit it shifted. And it crushed boxes on the bottom of the pallet, which means it's now doing its interpretation of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And it's only been held upright by the door of the truck. So some unsuspecting guy who hasn't experienced it before, opens the back of the truck, and there's a whole lot of stuff comes down. Where does the raw material price sit? Cost of raw materials impacts the overall cost of a product, because the unit cost of a product goes up. It's one of the overheads to the product going up. It should be set in advance, but in the current volatile world, that's not going to be agreed on. No supplier is going to agree on it, so they will factor in some sort of wiggle room. The biggest issue people have in things like raw material price, suppliers will push for bulk orders. The bigger the order, the cheaper it gets. So that gives you a cheaper unit price. That puts temptation on buyers to spend that sort of money. But what people forget about is a thing in supply chain called the TCO, the total cost of ownership. People forget that it's more than the cost of the product, the materials. It's also the cost of transport, insurance, the duties and tariffs and whatever else they have to pay as it's crossing various borders into or out of the EU. All becomes a problem. Yeah, that's the knock-on effect. Timber production has slowed down because you have because of COVID, because they don't have the people to do the job, because it takes time to flow it back through the system, because land has been destroyed, product has been destroyed, whatever. That shoves the price up. You've got more people looking for basic supply and demand. You've got a fixed supply. You've got high demand. It's the same as trying to find a hotel room when Garth Brooks is playing Dublin. Trying to find a normal price hotel room when Garth Brooks is playing Dublin. You can't, because there's only a certain amount of hotel rooms and they're all sold out, and people are just hotels can charge what they like because of the demand. When demand outstrips supply, prices go through the roof. And that causes problems. And then what you find is people start playing the market. They start holding off on supply until the price goes up. This is essentially what happens in the stock exchange with commodities. A person in a commodity will buy it at €1 a unit. They'll buy 1 million of them at €1 per unit, and then they'll hold them. Now, they don't actually take them. They don't own them. It's just their name is on them. That's about it. But because they've taken 1 million units they've bought 1 million units and taken it out of circulation, there's 1 million units less available to the rest of the marketplace. So which means the next person who comes looking for some of them, that product, is going to have to pay more for it because there's less of it there. There's more people looking for it. So that puts the price up. So over a period of time, the price, because global supply might go down, the actual unit price might go from a euro a unit up to €2 a unit. So it's doubled in price in the space of a very short period of time. Now, I had my million sitting there that I bought for €1 at each, at a cost of $1 million. The price is now 2 million. It's now the equivalent to 2 million, €2 a piece. So I sell my million units. I make €2 million. I made a €1 million profit. I've had to do nothing. But because I've now flooded 1 million units back into the system, price drops again. And that's what's happening in all other situations, all situations at the moment. Demand has gone high for products because everybody's opening back up and everybody's trying to get stock. All screaming for stock. That pushes the price up. Yeah, exactly. Short selling. Yeah, there has to be these extra things put in place, Damien, because otherwise things are out of control. At the end of the day, I mean, we can talk about, contractors and building and scaffolding and stuff like that, which is fine. We can talk about all that, and we will be talking about all that. But there's more to this whole hazard analysis, risk assessment stuff than just that. There's all this basic supply of materials that keeps your business going. And the decisions that will have a knock-on effect. If, as Mike said there, the cost of timber going up 40% in 12 months, that adds to the pain point of a builder, of a business using lumber, which then means that puts more pressure to get jobs finished. One, because the longer you delay, the more the prices are going up. And two, we need to get the cash back in so that we can move on and get on to the next job. So we're under pressure to get stuff done and cut costs. So if I'm hemorrhaging money in the purchase and the supply of materials, I'm going to look to cut costs somewhere else. And if that can be done by cutting corners in terms of scaffolding or in terms of other machine equipment, machine parts or whatever, and I can hold the machine together with a bit of sticky tape and string, off we go. I will, I hope. Memory's not great, Mike, but I'll see what I can do. But it's the scary part of business, is what's happening. And it all springs back and all comes back to the need for business continuity. The need to keep the business going and get things done. And the fact that all businesses exist for one reason. And hazard analysis, risk assessments, risk management are not those reasons. They all exist for one word, and it starts with a P. Profit. As a result of what's going on in the world, we have to react to everything else. And that has an impact on everything. If you're running a business, doesn't matter whether it's building or manufacturing, and you're worried about the list that's here on the screen, you're worried about supplier failures, natural disasters, fluctuating demand. So I don't know how much material I need, how much to buy. Manufacturing problems. Do the machines still work? Have I got enough people to run the machines? Can I get the staff to do it? I know of a lot of restaurants at the moment who are only open sort of Thursdays, Wednesdays to Sundays type of thing, or Wednesdays to Saturdays, or Thursday to Sunday. They're not open Monday and Tuesday because they can't get the people. They can't get the staff. It's not they can't get the clientele. They can't get the staff. and it's costing them in electricity, in heating, in all the stuff that they have to spend. We saw before Christmas small businesses, small cafes getting bills for 20 grand for electricity. That all impacts continuity. That all impacts the way things are being done. That has to impact business attitudes towards risk and hazards. It has to, because something has to give. The current climate is rife with it. I know of a business actually only found out about last week here in Carlow that, as long as I'm in Carlow, and I'm 24 and a half years living here now, has been on Tullow Street. And they announced last week they're closing. I think they're closing at the end of the month. They're not disappearing. They're closing the shop and they're going online. They've been selling an awful lot of product online since COVID, so for the last two to 3 years. And it's outstripping what they're selling in the shop. In the meantime, the council has raised the rates, has increased the rates. So they've basically said, you know what? We're not paying the rates. We're going to make cuts somewhere. So we're closing the shop. Staff are now going to move to working in a warehouse, packing orders and posting them, rather than working in the shop. So we'll keep the employment and we'll go the other way. Lots of businesses are being faced with change and forced to change just to survive. We'll change the word business continuity. They're looking to do this just to survive. And all of the uncertainty that's out in the marketplace right now, in terms of material prices, in terms of the supply of materials, will I get them? Or won't I get them? Even the simple things that we used to get from the UK, which is the majority of our materials, there's no guarantees on those anymore. They're having as many problems in terms of finding people to do the jobs as we are. And their economy or their population is 12 times the size of Ireland. They're 60 million, we're 5 million. We also have the issue of bringing stuff into the country. It's harder to get stuff into the country. We used to be able to land bridge it. So we used to be able to put it on a truck, drive it to northern France or Belgium, get it on a boat or on the Channel Tunnel, hop it across to the UK, drive it across the UK, get it to Holyhead or get it to Fishguard or Pembroke, hop it across the Irish Sea into Rosslare or into Dublin or into Belfast, wherever you want to bring it in from, and on down, delivered. Exposure on the water, minimal. 2 short hops at best. It's about 3 hours from Fishguard to, is it 3? Yeah, it's about 3 hours, I think, from Fishguard to Rosslare, or was anyway. And if you take the Channel Tunnel, it's 45 minutes on a train. But now we can't do that anymore. Well, we can, but you're incurring more costs because you're now exporting from the EU to a non-EU country, and then you're importing back into the EU, into Ireland, from a non-EU country. So we can't land bridge, which means we now have to put her on a boat, which means it's going to be longer at sea, which increases the risks. Bad weather may force the boat to stop and seek shelter somewhere, which will delay transport. Or the captain of the ship may decide, it's grand, I'll make it, as happened with Irish Ferries one time a number of years ago. coming from France to Dublin. And it was around this time of the year where we had storms every second day nearly. It was very rapid. It's about 2014, I think it was. Now, storm coming in, they normally came through fairly quickly. Captain decided the risk wasn't strong enough, or the hazard wasn't bad enough. He should have, when he left France, headed for Land's End and tucked in behind Land's End until the storm blew over, which would have taken a few hours, and then come out around Land's End and up the Irish Sea behind it. But he didn't. He decided to come all, I'll plough through. I need to get into Dublin. I need to get there. A bit like the Hurler Free Enterprise, I need to get there. We're running late. We need to make up time. Let's go. And he just went. And one of the trucks in the garage, one of the articulated trucks in the garage, broke its anchors. Cost, exactly. Cost. But the truck broke its anchors. And went like a pendulum. And demolished both the trailer itself, but also any vehicles in the area as it was being bounced up the Irish Sea. Because cost, time, pressures, reports, whatever. I presume, Garrett, that's shorthand for tea or coffee or something. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah, don't you have this Hapa State? It's Hapa State. Okay, sorry, apologies. Thanks for reminding me, Garrett. Okay, folks, let's take a break. How much time do you want to take in a break? 10 minutes, 15 minutes? Yeah, well, I'll probably be just infusing something stronger than that. Okay, I've got 2 10s and a 15. 12. Thanks, Trevor, for being awkward. Okay, we've got 3 10s, 2 15s, and a 12. Trevor sitting on the fence. 4 10s. Damien's pushing Trevor on the fence. Trevor's rounding up to 13. 13's unlucky for some, Trevor. Can't have that. All right, guys. Look, let's. Yeah, well, we're going to be able to be finishing up around about 9:30 anyway. I try to finish between 9:30 and 10:15 every night. I don't like going until 10 o'clock because people aren't paying attention. And believe me, I'm not paying attention by 10 o'clock at night either. So I try to finish between 9:30 and 10:15. Okay, so let's. It's 10:30. It's just after 10:30 now. Come by my clock here. It's just after 10:30. So let's give it till 1:45, which kind of uses up the extra odd few minutes that are up for negotiation in there. So I think it actually making it kind of 14 and a half. So let's say back here for 1:45. All right. Talk to you then. Okay, folks, we get back to it. Just see images coming up there, checking emails and things, and see a few images coming up from people of snow falling around the country. It has begun. A sure shoot and wave, ensuring that the country will grind to a halt tomorrow. Hi, Sue. Some more, just what we need. Just another risk assessment fee or another hazard analysis to be conducted. Yeah, it might be no harm. You may need to go out and do a hazard analysis, and you'll be having people trying to make sure that you work on the basis that it's a no school day type of thing. Yeah, as I say, there's one of the Doolin ferry that goes to the Aran Islands. They have a new boat coming on stream. They're getting ready for the season in March, and it's all iced up and snow on it. Snow and Kerry, yeah, as a former student of mine who was working for a company in Cork, has up images today of snow falling outside her office in Cork as well. So, yeah, all part of the fun of it. This is where this country grinds to a halt. Mike is remembering the beast from the east from a few years ago. Looking for Breadgate. Mike will be seen around corners in a trench coat with the loaves of bread and the slices of bread on the inside. Make an offer, huh? It's yet another thing that companies. Oh, you're flying it, so Mike. I mean, you're going to be your regular little mobile Sentra. And my car has a vehicle to load, so I can bring a toaster and can plug in a toaster and make people toast if they want it, so they can have hot bread. Which should, and it has snow driving. That's your flying, so we can plug the bread maker into the vehicle to load as well. Now what we need to do is make sure we get a steady supply of flour, which in COVID was one of the first things to pack up because everybody started making banana bread. And the reason they couldn't buy flour, because the flour manufacturers didn't realize there'd be such a demand on retail packets of flour. So all the flour they had was packed for commercial aspect, commercial manufacturing. So 25 kilo bags of flour, which of course those factories closed down. Well, you can don't take them out of the freezer now because it's freezing out there. They won't thaw out. It's -2 according to my computer here at the moment. So don't bother taking them. You can switch off the freezer and they'll stay frozen for you, save electricity. Turn off the freezer and open it. You'll have frozen anyway. You might have more frozen. It's amazing that when we look at this situation, we can laugh about the situation, but these are the type of things that businesses look at. It's icy, it's frosty, it's snowy. Will people turn up for work? Will that impact our supplies? Will it impact our manufacturing? When I was in purchasing, one of the things that worried me about continuity was the ploughing championships when they were coming around. Huge positive event. Biggest outdoor event in Europe. But as a purchasing manager, it was a hazard for me. And the hazard was traffic. And the tailbacks and the trouble that people have getting. Trucks would have of getting through. So I had to take some remedial action fairly quickly before the thing even started to make sure that I had continuity of supply. And working with suppliers to try and put plans in place to ensure that I did get supply. Proactive suppliers would come back to me and say, okay, how about the week before the ploughing, we'll give you 2 weeks worth of stock. And we won't come near you during the ploughing, and then we'll balance out the stock again the week after. That's not necessarily a solution because I have to consider, have I got space for it to safely store it where I'm not going to have members of staff falling over it, giving out about the fact that the whole place is clogged up because I double ordered. There are decisions across the board when it comes to anything to do with hazards or risks. All of them lead to the same thing. You do not stop, in my case, the production line. Yeah, I've heard of other places doing similar. They either took out, they either booked nearby hotels and B&Bs, or they had people sleeping on the factory floor. The people came to work and didn't go home for 2 days or 3 days or whatever, slept on the floor. Jeeps is a good proactive move. I mean, that hit us fairly hard and it hit us fairly quickly. They knew there was weather coming in, but I don't think they realized it was going to be as bad as it was, or certainly not have the impact that it had. But we're not built for that sort of weather. We're not built for. We don't know how to drive or how to manage or how to move in snow. I was coming back from Dublin at one point. Shortly as it was starting, there was a lot of snow around, but it wasn't the very bad. It hadn't really built up to the full dump on us. And where the M7 turns off onto the M9, you came off that, and just after you come onto the M9, the road goes into a sweeping left-hand curve, and there was an articulated truck with bananas for Mike. Fife's truck came down and decided, because you know in these snowy conditions there's one track generally that everybody's following, and the truck just pulled out to where there was no track and decided to blast past all of us on the bend. He had the height, but yeah, we don't. Back from the Beast in the East, they ran out of the salt, and when they got the salt in, they found out then it was too late, and the salt they kept had a shelf life. It's only been in the ground for millennia, but it had a shelf life, and therefore they couldn't use it for next year. Yeah, Gary, I think the less said about the HSE's response to things, the better. No disrespect to anybody working in the HSE, but I see their solution at the moment is to try and get planning to fast track any planning applications they have in without putting them through the usual rigors. I can just see that blowing up. All I could think of is Children's Hospital. In some case, I don't think the pub I actually think that when it comes to this, and I'm open to be corrected, and I don't want to make this module to be a doom and gloom situation, but I think the reality has to be also considered. We really don't necessarily, and I don't know, is it an Irish thing or is it a global thing, but we really don't seem to know how to manage hazard assessments or risk management as it would impact our business. You know, you're either focusing on doing it safely and doing it correctly, or you're focusing on getting the job done. Yeah, the agricultural sector, James, had to step up during the Beast from the East and bail people out, because they were the only ones that had the tractors and the equipment to attempt to move stuff along. I know people who couldn't get out of their house for several weeks. The snow was up there, halfway up the front door, and when they did dig themselves out of their house, go to the gate, out to their front gate, the road had 3 or 4 or 5 foot of snow, so they couldn't get out anyway. They just had the exercise of shoveling snow to get them to the gate, so they could see that they couldn't get any further. And just voluntary organisations like the Order of Malta, who have 4-wheel drives, went around moving people, and moving things around for people. Yeah, the Order of Malta. That's what I was just saying. Because I was with the Order of Malta for 30 odd years, not during this, but I was with them for 30 odd years, and they were their 4-wheel drives from the racing were seriously in overtime. But some of those Jeeps are only 2-wheel drive, which is kind of defeats the purpose going to a horse race. I've seen plenty of images and heard plenty of stories of Order of Malta 4-wheel drives getting towed out of muck because they got themselves stuck. Yeah, and that's the thing. The thing you see, Damien, we don't have the resources. So we can do a hazard analysis, we can do risk assessment, we can, whatever you want to call it, we can do the various things, but to remember there's 3 options. We can transfer it, we can mitigate it, or we can accept it. We accept something's going to go wrong, and then we know that if it does happen, we're going to have to deal with it. We can try to mitigate it, and we can put plans in place so that if it does go wrong, we can react to it. It's like we have a fire station, so that if there's a fire, we have people who can go and deal with it. Or we can transfer it. We can let somebody else take responsibility. We have the fire stations, but we don't have the people. Because the majority of firefighters, especially in rural areas, are not full-time firefighters. They're retained firefighters, so they're all part-time. And I know somebody who's done supervised a student who did a dissertation on this a number of years ago, and they're having desperate problems trying to retain part-time firefighters. Why? Because a part-time firefighter has another job, generally, and those employers are not happy to release them because business continuity. But flip the coin and you look at on the coast where you have the RNLI, and employers don't seem to have any problem releasing somebody who's with the RNLI. And they're completely voluntary. They don't even get a stipend. So it's different attitudes to managing risks that are going on around the world, around the country. And the knock-on effect is it comes back to business continuity, back to people's fear that if we deal with it, we're not going to have the people available, so things can go wrong, or if we wanted the people. It's a catch-22. And it's not an easy thing to go through. It's not an easy thing to deal with for businesses. You know, all the stuff that went wrong. So one thing I never did when I was in the Order of Malta, I never did horse racing. I was in Cork, the Cork unit, so it was always motorbike racing and hot rods and rallies. We did. We never did the horse stuff, thankfully. Not really into horse racing, but the hot rods and the scrambles and the rallies, the road races. We did all those. The type of stuff that can cause problems to business continuity that's happened over the years. 1995, earthquake in Japan, port closed, $100 billion worth of physical damage, and transportation impacted. 20,000 cars couldn't be produced on schedule by Toyota, just one manufacturer. Los Angeles, 2002, 10-day closure due to a strike. 1 billion to 2 billion losses per day. How do you mitigate that? It's industrial action. Try to be heavy-handed, and it's going to make it worse. Try to bring in replacement workers, what used to be called scabs, and it's worse. It makes it worse. An earthquake destroying the port in Japan, not much you can do to work around that. And they know Japan is prone to earthquakes. 2008, fire. Explosion in West Virginia. Shut down of production. Loss of profits. But also an investigation that showed the responsibility by the company was bad, and that led to other issues, as well as brand damage. Second earthquake in Japan, 2011, which also had the tsunami. I saw it again being mentioned on some program over the weekend. Largest natural disaster in Japan's history. They're only talking at the moment of the Fukushima nuclear power plant starting to release water, treated water, back into the ocean. Was it 12 years since it happened nearly? Volcanic eruption in Iceland. You can't, a lot of these, okay, the earthquakes, the volcanoes, you can't preempt them. You know they may be going to happen, but you don't actually know when. You don't have you know that if they are going to happen, you don't know how bad they're going to be. They knew Mount St. Helens was going to erupt at some point. They didn't realize it was going to erupt with such violence and cause a pyroclastic flow, which killed people and wiped and obliterated one side of the mountain. When Iceland, which has always had volcanoes, it erupted, they didn't realize it was going to shut down airspace in Europe because of the ash cloud. Nestle had to recall things because of E. coli. That is a hazard that should have been spotted. That's a quality management issue within the manufacturing process of Toll House cookie dough. That is somebody not doing their job. That is a check that wasn't done. That is something, possibly product was being rushed through. I've actually seen that situation here in Ireland. I've seen it here in Carlow. There's a manufacturer of brown soda bread. And they sell it in clear plastic Ziploc bags. And more than one occasion, I have bought that bread and brought it home. It's in date. It's perfectly fresh. Brought it home, put it in bread bin, bread box, whatever you want to call it. Get up the next day, say I'm going to have some brown bread now. Go to take out the brown bread, and there's lovely blue furry stuff growing on top of it. Has never been opened. and just has this stuff growing on it. And I know, or I open it and within a few hours there's mold all over the place. And I know how it's there. I know why it's there. And it's a hazard analysis. It's the condensation, yes, but what it is the product was sliced, packed, and sealed while it was still warm. It wasn't given the proper cool down time in production, probably because they were rushing to make a delivery. And as a result, when they sealed the bag, sealed the pack on it, the condensation from the heat didn't evaporate, has nowhere to go. It's stuck, it sticks to the inside of the plastic. And in transit, it condenses back to water droplets, drops back onto the bread, doesn't get absorbed through the crust, and essentially stagnates on top of the bread and rots. And I remember going into a my local Tesco at one stage when I saw it, and found one of the managers on the shop. And I said, I showed him the bread. And his reaction was, just go get another one off the shelf. So I said I would, but they're all that way. And he went, what? I said, they're all that way. I looked, the whole shelf has lovely blue dots growing on them. And he said, he shrugged his shoulders and walked away. He wouldn't even go and clear them off the shelf. He just shrugged his shoulders. That is that you could take it as management reaction to a hazard identified. What the heck? He walked away. They found actually, Mike, with strawberries in America, they were flying strawberries from, I think it was somewhere like Florida up to New York. And they were picking the strawberries, loading them on a plane to fly them up. But the problem they were doing was, as with all aircraft, the most freight is transported on a passenger aircraft. It's not necessarily on a cargo plane. And when you're transporting it on a passenger aircraft, you are transporting it in the cargo hold under the passenger compartment. Passenger compartment is pressurized. The cargo compartment is not pressurized to the same level. So a plane traveling at 30, 35, 38,000 feet, the air pressure and atmosphere and temperature in the cargo hold is significantly colder than it is in the passenger cabin. So what they found with the strawberries was the fruit was freezing at that height, at the higher altitude. And when the plane came back down to land at ground, obviously in New York or wherever they were flying to, it was coming back down into ambient temperature. So the fruit was thawing out. But as part of the process, which could also reflect what's going on with the peppers, part of what they found was when the fruit froze at the higher altitude, it was the water crystals within the fruit, the water droplets in the fruit, froze and therefore separated from the fruit, within the fruit. And when the plane came back down to ground level, that ice thawed out, but the water was not reabsorbed by the fruit, which essentially means exactly what you've just described for peppers. They rotted from the inside out. So somebody's picking up this lovely, juicy looking red, ripe strawberry and taking a nice big bite of it, and they were getting a bite of blue mold or something in the middle. Which I can imagine their reaction if they saw that. But again, this is something businesses don't pay attention to, because all they're interested in is get the product from A to B. The customer wants it now. And I've said it to people in the past, and when I told them that you do realize that most air cargo does not go on a cargo plane. It did in COVID because we didn't have passenger planes out there. We converted passenger planes to cargo, but most of them travel in a normal passenger aircraft. So you have passengers upstairs, you've got cargo downstairs, or in the boot, in the hold, and that's not treated the same as a passenger would be. There's a hazard. There is something that can go wrong. But because we need to get something from air transport is considered the fastest. So we need to get a product from A to B in a hurry. Let's stick it on a plane. I was talking to a person who works for a medical device company. Here's a hazard they didn't pick up on. And this is a global leader medical device company. They make hip replacements, among other things. One of the world's biggest. Factory in Cork. They got an urgent order for a hip replacement kit for surgery in Australia. They boxed it up, wrapped it up, medical supply, urgent. This was going to Australia, and it was literally being taken straight into the operating theatre. It was that urgent. So everything bar blue lights was put on this box to ship this kit urgently. And it was shipped. It left Cork, up to Cork Airport, onto a plane, and off it goes. A couple of days later, they got a phone call. It had arrived in the hospital in Sydney or wherever it was going, but they couldn't use the hip replacement. They got a very unusual phone call, apart from it being very irate. The phone call basically said, we can't use your bleeping hip replacement because it's melted. Now, the hip is made of metal, titanium or whatever they make. I think it's titanium they now make them out of. So it takes a heck of a lot to melt it. And they couldn't believe that this thing was actually melted. How the heck could a piece of that metal be melted? The box was sealed. Everything was completely sealed up. When they opened it, it was melted. And they had to do some investigation. And here's the hazard they didn't pick up. They didn't check the route. They didn't conduct an analysis of the route. Simple thing. How is this going to get there? It's a common thing in supply chain when I ask people, how does the product move from you to your suppliers, your customers, or your suppliers to you? And people look at me as if I've got two heads and say, it arrives. It comes in. We close the shutter door. When we open the shutter door, it's there. It's magic. What happened was this hip replacement was placed inside in a medical box, a secure box. That box was placed inside in a container or another box. That box was put inside in a third box, all marked medical device urgent. It flew from Cork to London and from London to Dubai or something like that. Because it was of high importance, the box was placed on a trolley beside an aircraft that was flying to Sydney and left sitting on the trolley on the runway beside the plane while they were loading the aircraft, because there was going to be the last thing in the door, so it would be the first thing out on arrival. Logic. There's good logic in that argument. What they didn't factor was the multiplier effect of the space in each of the boxes, sitting in desert heat in Dubai. the outside temperature was over 50. That gets magnified in the air between the outer box and the next box, which gets further magnified between that box and the next inner box. And so it continued until it got to the last box in which the actual replacement kit was. So by the time that it actually got to that inside the inner box, the inner sanctum, it was superheated. Nobody thought of that. They had a root cause analysis done after it. I only hope to God the patient wasn't lying on the operating theatre with the damaged hip cut out, waiting for the new part to be put in, because they were going home about a foot shorter until they got the new hip replacement. Yeah, it's one way of cutting some height out of it. But this is there's a hazard that nobody thought about, because all we're interested in is get the product from A to B, and we put it on a plane and everything will be fine. We put the fruit on a plane, everything will be fine. Gets off the other side, we look at it, it looks fine. But we don't actually consider the fact, like the peppers that Mike mentioned, we don't actually think about the fact that inside it may not be fine because of a reaction in the actual flight. Something went wrong. Back in the early 2000s, there was a ship crossing the Atlantic, got into a big fire, had to be abandoned. The fire did burn out, and the ship was actually salvaged, as far as I know. But I think it was 4 crew members lost their lives in that event. It had cargo below deck and cargo on the deck, containers on the deck, and it was below the deck that a fire started in containers. And it's because of the way things were stored and heat build up. And a basic reaction. As heat built up, some of the products within the containers started giving off gases that reacted with other areas, other issues. Boom. It burdened so bad that they had to abandon the ship. And it was the experts went back and identified and said, oh, there was one chemical that we moved, and it was a very unstable chemical. But they add a stabilizer to it in order to facilitate transport. And what they didn't pick up on was, before it was loaded on the ship, it was sitting on the quayside in some part of America, New Orleans, I think, in summer heat. And nobody factored in hazard analysis the impact heat has on the stabilizer. It reduces its effectiveness by at least 50%. So while the crew thought they were traveling across, their manifest was saying that they had this product in it and it had this stabilizer built in and everything's hunky-dory, nobody had factored in the fact that with given heat left sitting for a couple of days on the quayside, that is degrading the stabilizer. And that caused this process, which ended up costing 4 people their lives, and yada, yada, yada. Lost the entire cargo. It's so easy to get it wrong. But the driver is always business continuity. Nestle would have to recall. So a recall in quality terms is known as an escape. It's an external quality failure. The problem when it becomes an escape, is that it has now gone outside the control of the company. It is a worst case scenario because it's now public. It's the same as on a building site if somebody falls off a scaffolding. It's the same as in Nepal yesterday with an ATR 72 crashing. And somebody had a video of it just before it crashed. And the violent turn it made just before it crashed is kind of scary. ATR 72s, for people who may not be familiar with the aircraft, are the type of plane that we're using in Aer Lingus Regional. The little vomit comets. Great little planes. But 72 people dead. There'll be the investigation. Hopefully, as Mike pointed out, it won't be like the Ethiopian Air one that'll take 2.5 years for the response to come through. They'll find out what caused it. Unfortunately, it takes something to go wrong before a lot of these things happen. It takes escapes. It takes things to go wrong before people start to actually pay attention to the risks. Toll House or Nestle reacted because something was found outside. That is a sad thing. As Mike said earlier on, it takes the thing to happen before anything happens. Some of you might remember a little incident called the horse meat scandal a number of years ago. The burgers being found, the Tesco burgers being found with horse meat. You know, Shergar and red rum for those of us of a certain age, rather than 100% pure Irish beef. And the knock-on effect that had. Silvercrest Foods, who produced them, essentially went bust. They're now owned by Keepak, I think, or ABP, one of the big beef producers, who pretty much bought it for whatever loose change somebody had in their pocket. That entire thing was essentially caused by a buyer going off script. A buyer taking a shortcut or trying to make a few extra bob for the company. That entire thing was caused by that one person or a couple of people making a decision and essentially not doing the hazard check, not doing the risk analysis, not doing the relevant checks that should have stopped them. Because I know how the likes of Tesco do own label products. They essentially turn up with a folder and hand you a folder and say, right, there you go, make that. It tells you who to buy your raw materials from. It tells you what raw materials to use, what the ingredients are, what's the mix, they'll tell you every single thing about it. And they will check it. And you're expected to follow it. And somebody in Silvercrest made a decision to go to Eastern Europe and buy horse meat instead of beef. Now, in the supplier in Eastern Europe, the vets in that factory also broke all laws by falsely labeling the product to help the Irish buyers. And it's only when the FSAI got triggered on it or went off and did an analysis of it, they found horse meat, they found equine, not bovine. Again, it's after the thing has happened. It's one thing to have a risk and be trying to manage risks and assess risks when it's earthquakes or volcanoes or tsunamis or something that is to an extent we might know may happen, but we don't actually know when, where, or how bad. Yeah, exactly, Mike. But when it's something that's controllable by humans, we have to be prepared to go that extra mile. Because if it blows up in our face, it's going to blow up in our face big time. Silvercrest Foods, nobody ever heard of. Because they didn't produce a brand. Well, at least we know where Red Drum and Shergar ended up. It should never have happened. These guys don't produce their own brand. They are invisible. They only produce own label products. There's nothing on the shelf in any supermarket in the country that says Silvercrest Foods. You have Findus, you have Burger King, you have Tesco, you have all these own label products that come out of a factory. So they don't exist. So you really shoot yourself in the foot when you go against the rules. Now, the public had a bit of an outcry about the fact that there was supposed to be 100% pure Irish beef and there wasn't 100% pure Irish beef. Well, actually, there's nothing wrong with the labeling. The labeling was correct. It never said it was 100% pure Irish beef for the burger. Well, it did say 100% pure Irish beef, but if you turn it over and look at the ingredients, you'll see there's only 15% beef in it. So the 15% was 100% pure Irish beef, supposedly. So the other 85% is made up of whatever they want to put in there. There's nothing wrong. They eat exactly as just about to say that, Mark. Horse meat is eaten in other parts of Europe. It's not a big thing. And majority of people didn't know they were eating it, so they thought they were eating burgers. And once you fry the thing up in so much oil and fat and so on, you're not going to taste it anyway. And then you cover it in sauces and mustards and stuff. You certainly won't taste the meat. It's just a texture at that stage. The point I'm making is hazards, we can't get away from them. They're always going to be there. Risks are always going to be there. And the last 3 years should have taught us that the wilder the idea, it's still a risk. We can be overprotective and we can plan for every type of risk that's available. But it's more important that we at least are aware that things can go wrong. And when they do, we have a plan to deal with them. That we can be compliant with what we need to be compliant with right now. And at least prevent some of the stuff going wrong. Even if it is a pain. Even if it is additional steps and processes and red tape. But the thing is, we've got to apply it consistently. And we've got to apply it regardless of level of person within the organization and regardless of circumstance. No matter how much pressure things are under, we need to make sure we still apply it. The person I know was working in a warehouse at one stage. He was a warehouse supervisor and he happened to be on a forklift and he was driving around doing whatever he was supposed to be doing with the forklift. The next thing, the general manager came on into the warehouse. No personal protective equipment, just wearing the expensive suit. And he called him and brought him over to a specific area in the warehouse and bring the forklift over with you. So he went over with the forklift, and proper way of traveling with the forklift is the forks are down low and tilted. Got to where the manager was and he tilted the forks forward, flat on the ground for safety. Next thing, the manager stands on the two forks and said, right, hoist me up there to the second level. I want to get a box. He said, no. What do you want? I'll get the pallet down. Just hoist me up. I'll take a box off the pallet. Don't waste your time taking it down. That's a total waste. Okay. Well, I'll go and I'll get the cage and I'll bring it back. You can step into the cage and I'll hoist you up and you can get your box. Just hoist. I'll be up and down in the length of time it would take you to get the cage. And in the length of time you're telling me you're going to do that stuff, I'd have been back down with it. Just hoist me up. So this guy said no. And he turned off the forklift, put on the handbrake, got off the forklift with the keys in his hand and walked away. And he was called to the manager's office. And he was screamed at from the height and threatened with being fired if he ever pulled a stunt like that again. As a matter of fact, the boss was contemplating firing him on the spot. Everything the boss wanted him to do was a breach of health and safety. Was an incomplete breach of the process. I believe it, Raymond. We see it all the time. I've seen it as well. And I've been hand up. I've been as guilty of taking chances on a forklift as anybody else. Back in the day, used to use it like a climbing frame. But this is the thing. We got management abusing the system. And if we don't follow the rules, and for example, forklift drivers in warehouses are supposed to conduct full analysis of the forklift before they move it. They're supposed to do a full safety check before they move it. Check the lights, check the hydraulics, check the battery levels, check everything. And if they find a flaw, they're not supposed to drive the forklift. And when I say that to people when we're doing warehouse training or warehouse lectures or whatever, and I say that to people, first response I'll generally get will be, if I refuse to drive a forklift because the flashing orange light on top doesn't work, I'll be fired. I said, but you're not supposed to drive it if the light's not working. It's a warning. You're not supposed to drive a forklift without it. It's what it's there for. If I refuse to drive a forklift because the flashing orange light's not working or because the horn doesn't work, I will be fired. And I said, you can't be fired. I can. I said, you can't be fired. Because if you're fired, you've got them from wrongful dismissal. And when you go to court about it, they will be over the barrel and they'll pay you a fortune. They'll have to. If you go out in a forklift which doesn't have the equipment, it doesn't pass the safety check, and you have an accident, you will be liable, not the employer. Because they'll say, why didn't you report it? And you shouldn't have driven it if it was broken. And did you know the light wasn't working? Or did you know the brakes didn't work or whatever? I've had it, and I used to drive buses. I've had it from a manager and the owner of a bus company. That I was driving a bus which only had one working gear. The gear lever came off the gearbox. And when I rang him for a replacement bus, I got effed out of it and basically asked, what the hell do people want? I said, they want a bus with more than one gear in it. And he sent me down the biggest heap of junk he had to punish the passengers because they demanded a different bus. What he sent down was nearly worse than what they had. People take chances, as management is driving it. How about a bus where the back end of it, the entire back seat, was held on with pop rivets? You're told when you get into the bus, don't let anybody sit on the back of the bus. If you do too many people, you go over a bump, the whole back of the bus will fall off. Literally. This is the type of stuff we're there for. But people believe we're at the mercy of management. In reality, if it's a breach of basic health and safety regulations, if it's a breach of the SOP, assigned standard operating procedure, then the employee is protected. We may not feel it because you have the wrath of the guy in the suit or the girl in the suit. Yeah, you were trained, but the thing is that we should be able to use that you were trained in the event of, yeah, I was trained and you taught me that I shouldn't move this if that's damaged, and that's damaged, I'm not moving it. And if you want to force me to move it, then you move it. Now it's going on for centuries. I have cousins who work in Bus Éireann. And this cousin, his father worked in Irish Rail as a train driver, and he would turn into the station. He'd go to the sheds where the trains are serviced. He'd go to the mechanics. He'd say, that train has a problem. They'd say, fine, leave it there. We'll take a look at it. He's done his bit. He's reported an issue. He's gone off. I come on shift later on. I needed to take a train to Dublin. I need an engine to do it. They said, take that one. The one that the other guy had just handed in. Has it been fixed? No. Will they tell you there's a problem with the brakes? No. They'll forget that. But they'll just say, there's that one there. That's running away. Take it away with you. Grand, perfect. I need to get on the road up to Dublin, so I'll take it. I need to get it sorted out now. It's been going on for millennia. You know, it's as long as people have been trying to make a profit, we've been cutting corners. Unfortunately. I mean, you guys are dealing with this more than I am every single day of the week. You see it every day of the week. You see the cause and effect. You see what the results. You see the whole thing, and that's kind of what we want to explore as we go through the rest of this module. But for now, at 20 to 10 in the evening, I'm going to call it a halt. There's a bit more on that you can take a look through. It's just some tools that businesses use, looking ahead into planning for what's happening in businesses or what can happen, Pastel analysis, SWOT analysis, type of stuff you may have come across in the past. If you have any questions, bang me an email and I'll do my best to answer them for you. Other than that, thank you very much for the contributions this evening. Have a good week, and I shall talk to you all next Monday. Stay safe.